Hello and welcome back to Round the Table, slow TV radio from the meeting point, broadcasting not only to Bilbao but throughout the world. Hello again and welcome back to Round the Table, episode 80. And this week we have been discussing the topic of migrants, and we have had some heated conversations, one might say. And in this programme we've got the usual vocabulary, a few typical mistakes, a bit of pronunciation, and of course our wonderful celebrity guest speaker from the other side of the Atlantic. But first we've got a quote of the week. And this week's quote of the week has absolutely nothing to do with the conversations we've been having in the meeting point, but it is quite topical to do with things in the news. This is a quotation from a British Member of Parliament called Simon Hoare. I've never heard of him before, but apparently he's a politician in Britain, and he is talking about another politician in the world. And your task is to see if you can guess who he is speaking about. And the quote is, "Frankly, he makes my skin creep and my stomach turn. Where are his advisors? Where is his nurse? Where is his sense of shame?" A wonderful description of a well-known politician. If you can guess the subject of the quotation, who he is speaking about, if you put the answers down below in the comments, you might win a prize. So let's get back to the topic of migrants and let's look at some phrases from this week's conversation. So some of the phrases this week, I've put in a bit of the vocabulary here as well and a few interesting collocations for you. The first phrase is, birds of a feather flock together. This is a well-known saying. Obviously, if you look in nature, birds of the same type tend to be in large groups. So a flock is a group of birds. You can also use it as a verb when groups come together. So birds of a feather flock together. The reason this came up in conversation is we were talking about migrants. And if people from another country move abroad, they usually find people of the same culture, of the same origin. So you get these communities of people that build up in certain areas in a city. People from the same country tend to find other people. They can get help, they've got certain things in common, they share the same culture and language, so they tend to flock together. Break down barriers came up in conversation as well. We often have invisible barriers between different cultures of local people and immigrants, and sometimes we need a bit of contact. We need to break down the barriers sometimes and share things and have a bit more human contact between the two groups. So that is to break down the barriers. The next one is the brain drain. Drain normally is where the water goes from the kitchen sink. It all goes down the drain. Drain is to take away liquid, usually. But this is a phrase that came up maybe 30 years ago. The brain drain is when educated people, they get the education in the country of origin, but they can't find the quality of work. So you get a lot of computer people, doctors, they tend to move abroad because in other countries there are better job opportunities or more money. So we lose our most intelligent people. Even though they've done all their training and their studying in one country, they often work in another. So that is called a brain drain. Heated conversation, as I mentioned earlier. We got very passionate in some classes. People had quite strong opinions. We never had an argument, of course, but we did have a heated conversation. From one extreme to the other. So if you went from poverty to great wealth, from a poor country to a rich country, the phrase is from one extreme to the other. You can imagine what that means, I suppose. Next, we have red tape. In English, we often refer to the red tape, the bureaucracy, the paperwork that needs to be done. If you go to another country, it can be quite complicated to do all the paperwork to register as a resident. And if you want to pay your taxes and do everything officially, all of that paperwork you need to do is called red tape. It's because often in legal terms they would have folders of documents and they were tied together with like a red ribbon. So that is the metaphorical red tape that you have to go through. So it's when there's lots of bureaucracy and paperwork to be done. Two-faced is a way of saying hypocritical. And hypocritical is the adjective and a hypocrite is the person. Obligated. This word obligated isn't really used in English. It does exist. It's used sometimes in more legal terminology because it's a Latin-based word. So you don't really need this word when you're speaking English. You would say you must do something. You have to do something. You can make somebody do something, or you can be made to do something. There is the word obliged as well, but that is more to do with what you think is morally correct. I was obliged to tell him the truth. I was obliged to help. You see, in those contexts, I felt it was the correct thing. So normally we wouldn't use this word obligated, even though it will be in the dictionary if you look, but you never hear anybody say it. A vicious circle. You all know what a vicious circle is, but that's the pronunciation. A vicious with a v at the beginning and a sh in the middle. Vicious. A difficult word to say. Religious persecution. Persecution. It's normally coming with religious persecution, sometimes political persecution, maybe for other reasons. Ethnicity, sexual preferences you can be persecuted for. It is very specific, the word persecution in English. So when you do not use it, if you see a police car chasing another car, that is not persecution. That is a car chase or a police chase. But it's not persecution. Persecution is when one group of people, or maybe an individual, suffers for their beliefs, usually political beliefs, religious beliefs, those kind of things. That is persecution. And it's not prosecution. Prosecute somebody is legal action. To take somebody to court is to prosecute because they did something wrong. So prosecution, not the same as persecution. Job prospects. That's another way of saying job opportunities, job prospects. The standard of living, the reason why people go to live in another country is usually for a better standard of living. A work permit. I put this in because permit is the permission, but it normally refers to the piece of paper that gives you permission. So if you go to live in another country, you'll need a work permit. And sometimes if you go fishing in a lake, you might need a fishing permit. So they're often called permits. A multicultural society is one in which many people live of different ethnicities and from different origins. That's a multicultural society. And if there are problems between two very different cultures in a society, you have a culture clash. And those are the phrases from this week's conversation. Let's have a look at a little bit of pronunciation. Here are a few words. Foreign. People from other countries are foreign. I know it's a strange looking word and people often spell it incorrectly and pronounce it incorrectly. Foreign, foreign. Drought. Drought is when there is no water in a country. When it does not rain for a very long time, you have a drought. Ignore the GH in the middle. It sounds the same as out. Drought. Famine, when there is no food, often because there was a drought. The drought causes a famine. So famine, ignore the E on the end. Famine. Flood. When there's too much water, you have a flood. And of course, the double O in the middle just sounds like a U. Flood. The same as blood. And screen. When you're working on your computer, you're looking at a screen with an N on the end. Not to be confused with scream with a M on the end. Often people say scream when they mean screen, and they say screen when they mean scream. Very confusing. And talking pronunciation, let's play another one of those little games. Here are some words which may sound very similar to you. Starting at the top, sip. Sip. S-I-P. Sip is to drink something very slowly and carefully. If it's very hot, for example, you might sip your coffee. Sip. Sheep. Sheep is the animal with a sh at the beginning and a long E. And then ship. The one that goes on the ocean is a ship with a short I in the middle. Shape. Shape is the next one. And then two confusing ones. We have soap in the middle there. Soap, the one that you wash with. And soup. Soup that you eat or drink. It's liquid food. Soup. On the bottom line there we have seep. Seep. That is when a liquid passes through something. Seep. Look in the dictionary for a better definition. And the final one is shop, where you go shopping, where you buy things. So we have sip, sheep, ship, shape, soap, soup, seep, shop. Now, I'll say one of these and you have to say which one it is. The first one is ship. Ship. I went across the ocean on a ship. Shape. Shape. Soup. Soup. Sheep. Sheep. Seep. Seep. Sip. Sip. Shop. Shop. Ship. Sheep. Sip. Seep. Soup. Soap. Shape. And shop. There you go. That was a good game, wasn't it?
hello again to all my wonderful fans over there at the meeting point in Bilbao, and to listeners of the Round the Table podcast. This week I've been asked to share a few thoughts on the topic of migrants, so here you are. Migration is a complex and deeply human phenomenon that has existed throughout history. People move from one country to another for many reasons, often driven by a mix of necessity and hope. Understanding these motivations helps move the conversation beyond simple labels and towards a more realistic view of why migration happens. One major reason people migrate is economic opportunity. Many leave their home countries due to unemployment, low wages, or a lack of prospects for advancement. Others are forced to move because of war, political instability, persecution, or environmental problems such as droughts or natural disasters that make daily life unsafe or unsustainable. Arriving in a new country, however, is rarely easy. Migrants often face language barriers, cultural differences, and difficulties getting their qualifications recognized. Finding stable housing and employment can be challenging, and discrimination or social isolation may further slow their integration into the host society. From the host country's perspective, migration can raise concerns. Some people worry about pressure on public services, competition for jobs, or changes to cultural identity. These fears, whether justified or not, often shape political debates and public opinion, sometimes leading to tension or polarization. At the same time, migration can have negative effects on countries of origin. One example is brain drain, where skilled workers such as doctors, engineers, or teachers leave in search of better opportunities abroad. This loss of talent can slow development and weaken essential services in poorer countries. Despite the challenges, immigration also brings clear benefits. Migrants often fill labor shortages, contribute taxes, and help support aging populations. They bring new skills, perspectives, and cultural richness, which can drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth. Ultimately, migration is neither purely a problem nor a simple solution. When managed thoughtfully, with fair policies and support for integration, it can benefit both migrants and host societies. A balanced approach recognizes challenges, while also acknowledging the long-term social, economic, and cultural gains immigration can offer.
On Thursday, our discussion on migrants got onto the topic of migration and birds, and how in the ancient times, well, going back to medieval times, they didn't really understand the concept of migration. They didn't know where certain birds went in the summer or in the winter. Suddenly birds disappeared and they had no idea. And I was just checking this week about barnacle geese. There's a type of goose called a barnacle goose. Now, this is actually a compound noun. When you have a compound noun, the second word is the important one. The first one is describing the second one. So a barnacle goose is a type of goose, this bird. There's another thing called a goose barnacle. A goose barnacle is, well, it's quite a delicacy. If you go to Galicia, they love eating them, and they're very expensive. They're called goose barnacles. That's a type of barnacle, and it looks like a goose. The strange thing was that in medieval times, they actually believed that these two things were the same. A goose barnacle and a barnacle goose were the same thing, because they didn't know, because they'd never seen a baby goose or the nest of this type of goose, and they thought that they came from the barnacles that they saw growing on rocks and on bits of wood in the sea. So they believed that this was all one animal, the goose barnacle and the barnacle goose. Now you might think this is a very strange thing to believe, but the benefit is, because they could not eat meat on Fridays, they could only eat fish. They could eat barnacle geese because they came from the sea, therefore they must be fish. They had strange logic in those days. So that's the relationship between a barnacle goose, which is a goose, and a goose barnacle, which is a barnacle. Which brings us on to a little bit of grammar. Compound nouns. As I say, when you have a compound noun, that's a noun plus another noun. The first one describes the second one. So the second one is the thing that we're talking about. So a horse race is a type of race that involves horses. It's not a motorcycle race or a dog race. It's a type of race that involves horses. A racehorse is a type of horse which is used for racing. It's not a workhorse or a cart horse. Those are other types of horses. So a horse race is a race involving horses. A racehorse is a horse used for racing. A shop window is a type of window that you would find on a shop. A window shop would be a shop that sells windows. Okay, so the second one is the main one, the first one is describing. These are compound nouns, and you'll see that the stress goes on the first word. Racehorse, horse race, shop window. Okay, the stress goes on the first one. Usually, if you have an adjective first, the stress would go on the noun. So, for example, if you had this is very, very difficult pronunciation, okay? This is, if this is too complex, you can stop listening now. This is going to get complicated. If you have a tree that is made of rubber, and that word rubber is the adjective, you've got a rubber tree. You see there's stress on the word tree. It's a rubber tree. If you go to Malaysia, there is a type of tree that produces rubber. And in that one, it's a rubber tree. A rubber tree. That rubber is the noun. Okay, it's not describing what it's made of. So a rubber tree is a tree that is made of rubber, and a rubber tree is the type of tree that produces rubber. There's a very slight change in the stress there. Likewise, if you go to any British town, they have the main street through the town centre is called the High Street. The High Street. Normally that word high would be an adjective, but because it's sort of joined together in a compound, we look at it as one thing, and we don't think of the word high as an adjective. So it's not a high street, it's a high street. And we put the stress on the high. Even though it's an adjective, it works like a compound. I've put a picture here of a couple little birds. The bird on the left is called a blackbird. If you saw a bird that was black, you might say you saw a black bird with stress on bird. But again, this has become a compound over the years. The type of bird is known as a blackbird with stress on the black. And on the right, you can see these little birds. They are called tits. There are blue tits and coal tits, long-tailed tits, and these ones are called great tits. So don't forget to put the stress on the first syllable there. Today I saw some great tits. Make sure you put the stress on the first syllable. Which reminds me, coming up in a couple of weeks we'll be discussing the topic of taboo. Meanwhile, next week we'll be discussing the topic of names. Given names, family names, nicknames, names of different streets in your town. Even the names of towns would be interesting. So, if I don't see you through the week, have a good week. Till next week.